Born Salvatore Lucania in 1897 in Lercara Fritti, Sicily, he was no stranger to poverty. His father was a sulfur miner. The air was thick with dust and futures were short. But Salvatore wanted more than survival. He wanted power. In 1906, the family moved to New York City, settling in the Lower East Side. But the American dream wasn't made for immigrant kids. Not like him. Not when your name was too foreign, your pockets too empty, and your accent too thick. So Salvatore changed the rules. He Americanized his name, Charles Lucky Luciano, after surviving a vicious beating and a knife to the throat. Lucky, maybe, but more likely, untouchable. He skipped school, ran with street gangs. By 14, he was running protection rackets. By 18, he was dealing drugs and robbing strangers at gunpoint. But unlike the average thug, Luciano had vision. He wore fine suits, spoke fluent English, studied the mob like a chessboard. He wasn't just learning how to survive in the underworld, he was preparing to reshape it. In a city overflowing with gangs, bribes, and bullets, Lucky Luciano didn't just rise, he built his own staircase. His first major move came under the wing of Arnold Rothstein, the so-called brain behind the 1919 World Series fix. Rothstein didn't just deal in crime, he engineered it like a business, and Lucky was his best student. Rothstein taught him three things: always think long-term, never get your hands dirty, and never show fear. Luciano listened, and then he acted. He joined Joe, the boss Masseria, one of New York's most powerful Italian mobsters. But Masseria was old school, superstitious, tribal, stuck in Sicilian tradition. He didn't trust outsiders. He didn't work with Jews. He didn't evolve. Luciano saw the flaw and began plotting his own vision of organized crime. Alongside lifelong friends like Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, Luciano imagined a world where Italians, Jews, and Irish didn't fight each other. They worked together, profit over pride, order over chaos. He built quiet alliances, moved heroin through the docks, and stacked cash while Masseria's empire slowly rotted from inside. But power never changes hands quietly. To take control, Luciano needed to eliminate both the past and anyone who clung to it. By 1931, Lucky Luciano had waited long enough. The old Mafia was choking on its own rules: feuds over ancestry, vendettas over money, loyalty defined by blood, not logic. Luciano was done bowing to dinosaurs. He made his move. First target, Joe the Boss Masseria, his own employer, mentor, and ticking time bomb. Luciano lured him to a restaurant in Coney Island. A quiet lunch, friendly cards, everything calm, until Luciano excused himself to the restroom. In those few seconds, the room was stormed. 4 gunmen, allegedly Bugsy Siegel, Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, and Joe Adonis, fired at point-blank range. Masseria fell face down, playing cards still clutched in his hand. The old guard was dead, but there was one more relic to burn. Salvatore Maranzano, Masseria's rival, had declared himself the capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses. He crowned himself emperor over all the families. To Luciano, it sounded too familiar, too arrogant, too dangerous. Luciano pretended to serve him, briefly. Then, just months later, he struck again. Disguised as IRS agents, Luciano's men walked into Maranzano's Manhattan office. In suits and ties, they pulled out knives and guns. Maranzano didn't have time to scream. He was stabbed and shot to death, surrounded by ledgers, paperwork, and outdated dreams. With 2 kings dead by his hand, Luciano did something no gangster had ever dared. He destroyed the throne. No more boss of bosses. No more wars over Sicilian pride. Instead, he formed something new: the Commission, a boardroom of crime, 5 main families, plus national syndicate representatives, all voting on decisions like a Fortune 500 company. Territories divided, conflicts resolved. Murders had to be approved, like budget cuts. Luciano didn't just kill the old world. He buried it and replaced it with an empire. With Maranzano gone and the commission in place, Lucky Luciano wasn't just a mobster anymore. He was the CEO of American organized crime. From the shadows, he oversaw a network that stretched across states and seas. No longer limited to petty rackets or street-level violence, Luciano transformed the Mafia into a corporate machine. Casinos, docks, nightclubs, unions, everything had a price, and Lucky had a piece. He controlled the New York waterfront, where every crate, every shipment, every barrel of liquor moved under his watch. Truckers paid him. Dock workers feared him. Union bosses answered to him. And while his Italian peers ran their neighborhoods, Lucky thought bigger. He partnered with Meyer Lansky, the financial genius behind the scenes, to tap into a new frontier: Las Vegas, Havana, Cuba. Before the glitz and glamour of the Vegas Strip, it was just sand and desert. But Lucky and Lansky saw the future: casinos, hotels, entertainment, money that never slept. They invested in offshore casinos in Havana, with political protection from dictators like Fulgencio Batista. The mob had found its paradise. No laws, no heat, all profit. From the smoke-filled clubs of Manhattan to the sun-drenched tables of Havana, Luciano's empire ran without borders. He wasn't flashy like Capone. He didn't care for headlines. He didn't need the public to love him. He just needed them to play their roles. Politicians to look away, cops to take the envelope, and enemies to disappear. And behind it all, the commission kept order. Killings were approved. Disputes were negotiated. Revenge gave way to revenue. For a moment in American history, organized crime was more organized than government. But every empire, no matter how silent or brilliant, eventually hears footsteps. And for Luciano, they came from someone who didn't care about tradition, respect, or even crime. For years, Lucky Luciano moved like smoke, present in every room, yet untouchable. But not everyone was afraid of the dark. Enter Thomas E. Dewey, a rising star prosecutor with ambition as sharp as his jawline. He wasn't for sale, he didn't take envelopes, and he didn't care that Luciano was too big to touch. Dewey wanted a win, and Lucky was the perfect trophy. But how do you bring down a man who leaves no fingerprints? You find where he's vulnerable, and that meant going low, into the brothels. Dewey's team arrested dozens of prostitutes and madams, leaning hard on fear, shame, and jail time. Eventually, a few cracked, and Luciano's name came up again and again, not as a direct participant, but as the man taking a piece of everything. It wasn't murder, it wasn't heroin, but it was enough. In 1936, Luciano was arrested and charged with compulsory prostitution, a technical term that masked the reality. He was being taken down on vice, not violence. He claimed innocence, hired the best lawyers, smiled in court, but the case stuck. He was convicted on 62 counts, sentenced to 30 to 50 years in Dannemora prison, a place colder than any New York courtroom. And just like that, the kingpin who modernized organized crime was behind bars, cut off from the commission, cut off from Havana, cut off from the streets he once ruled with whispers. But even caged, Lucky was never powerless. From his prison cell, messages still traveled. Orders were passed, deals were made, and when World War II broke out, fate gave him one last ace. The U.S. Navy, fearing Axis spies on the docks, turned to the only man who truly controlled the waterfront, Lucky Luciano. From prison, Luciano agreed to help, ensuring protection and silence along the East Coast in exchange for one thing: freedom. In 1946, the government commuted his sentence, but there was a catch. He wasn't free to return to his throne. He was exiled to Italy, put on a ship and sent across the Atlantic, back to a country he no longer recognized and that no longer welcomed him. The king was alive, But his kingdom was gone. Naples, Italy, a city of noise, chaos, and color. But for Lucky Luciano, it felt like a cage with fresher air. He walked the streets of his birthplace not as a son returning home, but as a stranger in exile. America had shut the door behind him. The empire he built now belonged to younger, hungrier men. But Luciano was not finished. Not yet. From Naples, he reached across the sea with whispered calls and coded letters. He advised, suggested, corrected, always from the shadows. He watched as the commission evolved, expanded, and modernized. He remained the ghost in the machine. In 1946, he re-emerged for one last power move. The infamous Havana Conference. Held in Cuba, it was a summit of mob royalty: Lansky, Genovese, Siegel, Trafficante, Anastasia. They drank champagne, smoked cigars, and discussed everything from drug routes to gambling territories. Luciano was back at the head of the table, not in name, but in presence. But his appearance in Havana drew attention. American officials, furious that he'd re-entered the Western Hemisphere, demanded his removal. Under pressure, the Cuban government deported him back to Italy. His moment in the sun, gone again. And this time, it would never return. In Italy, Luciano became a symbol, not a leader. Under constant surveillance, followed by both the Italian police and American intelligence, he spent his days pacing small apartments, reading old papers, and watching his past unfold through the actions of others. He tried to stay involved, dipping into heroin rings, shipping networks, whispers in Sicily, but his influence was fading. Time had moved on. New bosses, new rules, new blood. And Lucky? He was yesterday's ghost. On January 26, 1962, Luciano met with a Hollywood producer interested in making a movie about his life. Just as he was leaving the meeting, his heart gave out. He collapsed at Naples International Airport. Died on the spot. No shootout, no betrayal, just silence. He was 64. The Italian government refused to honor him. But America, it remembered. His body was flown back to New York. Over 2,000 people attended his funeral, buried in St. John's Cemetery, beneath a headstone that simply read, Charles Luciano. No throne, no crown, just a name, and a shadow cast over the history of crime that still lingers today. Al Capone made headlines, Bugsy Siegel made Vegas, but Lucky Luciano made the Mafia. He didn't just run the streets, he redesigned the architecture of organized crime. Before him, the mob was tribal, chaotic, violent without reason. After him, it was a machine. The commission he built still echoes in the way today's crime syndicates operate. Votes, order, structure. Murders became sanctioned. Wars became negotiations. Luciano turned gangsters into businessmen, and crime into a business model. He proved that loyalty could extend beyond blood, that profit could unify races and regions. He made deals with Jewish mobsters, worked with the Irish, even negotiated with governments. He saw no borders, only opportunity. Even after exile, even after death, Luciano's methods survived. The Mafia's expansion into casinos, unions, international drug trafficking, all bear his fingerprints. But his influence didn't end with the mob. Corporate crime, political corruption, global smuggling networks. Many of them follow the Luciano playbook. Move quietly, delegate everything, control the infrastructure, and never, ever let your name be on the paper. To law enforcement, he remains a puzzle. The man who created a system so efficient that it still resists complete dismantling. To pop culture, he's an icon. Played by actors, depicted in novels, taught in classrooms as the man who invented modern American crime. But to history, Luciano is something more complicated. Not just a gangster, not just a visionary, but a man who saw the cracks in the system and built an empire within them. Lucky Luciano didn't die in a blaze of gunfire. He didn't go down screaming in court. He died quietly, privately, because his greatest act of violence was not a murder. It was creating order where chaos once ruled. He didn't want to be remembered as a criminal. He wanted to be remembered as the architect, and in that, he succeeded.